you love movies and movie discussions, you've come to the right place. Who am I, you ask? I am the Wiz, and I'm here today with...
Zero.
How you doing today?
A little bit better. I think I'm almost finally over this sinus infection thing I've been dealing with.
Good. Those are a bitch, man.
Yeah.
They're terrible. All right, so we are here today to review the 1990 fantasy comedy Edward Scissorhands, starring Johnny Depp, Diane Weiss, Winona Ryder, and Anthony Michael Hall, directed by Tim Burton. Zero, I reviewed Beetlejuice last year, and before Beetlejuice, I was never really a big fan of Tim Burton, but I'm suddenly starting to realize that maybe I gave him a raw deal on my end. What were your thoughts on Tim Burton before watching this movie?
I've always thought Tim Burton was kind of a fun director, but mostly it was due to me being exposed to some of his more notable older works, like Batman from 1989, and then the sequel, Batman Returns in 92. Mars Attacks was another one that I know that people have loved to death. So those are kind of like the big name films that I'm most familiar with him on. And then there was the one musical film, Sweeney Todd, the Demon Barber of Fleet Street, which I thought was really interesting. Seems like he does some pretty good work, but I think much like you mentioned, there are some of his newer works that didn't really quite stick the landing quite as neatly as some of his other works.
I completely forgot about Mars Attacks. That movie was funny. I saw that in theaters. That was a crazy time watching that movie. All right, Zero, so why don't we start with your thoughts on Edward Scissorhands?
It's a very, very interesting gothic romance and fantasy film. If it's anything sort of involving Edward's past, it goes into kind of like a really, really sort of dull and drab color palette. And then when you go into like the normal suburb life, it's just so bright, vibrant, and colorful. And I thought thematically that was just fantastic on the principal photography end of the movie. Then, of course, just with how Edward's got a real pale pallor in his skin color and stuff like that. It kind of goes with that sort of theming as well, too. Everyone in the suburb just has like more rosy colored skin. I just thought it was just kind of interesting on a visual and thematic piece. It's got some very, very funny moments. It's got its dark and violent moments as well, too. It's not anything gratuitous for anyone wondering when I say the word violent. It's nothing like extremely graphic.
No, not at all. And that was the kind of the weird thing going into this. So expecting this movie to be a little bit scary because Tim Burton, it looks dark and gothic. And I was very surprised by how light the film is in tone. I like how you mentioned the parts of his past and how it looks very gray and drab. And that it was really evocative of, I would say, the horror films from like the 30s, 40s, and 50s. I think that's what he was trying to evoke there was, especially with having Vincent Price as the inventor in that scene, because the place that he's living in is like a castle. It really reminds you of stuff like Frankenstein and Dracula and stuff like that. In any other circumstance, Edward Scissorhands would be a movie monster, and yet the film just inverts everything by making him very meek, very quiet. It's strangely sweet. It's really interesting to really have the juxtaposition of having this really scary looking guy, and yet he is so sweet and kind and lovable. It's really odd, but it really works in this movie. And that really helps with the film's absurdist humor in this film. Because when you look at Edward Scissorhands, if you were to see someone like that in real life, I don't know about you, dude, I'd be like, what the fuck is that? Oh my god, run now. In this movie, everyone's like, oh, you got a new friend? Oh, you got a new, like it's really absurd how everyone's like, oh, you have a new person. Who is the new person you have in your life? I'm like, what the hell? Look at him. What the fuck is going on? But what I think also is that it satirizes certain elements of not only of those horror films I mentioned before, but also 50s films like family comedies and dramas like Leave It to Beaver or Dennis the Menace, where everyone's very chipper and it looks a specific way and it's about family and everything. I think it satirizes both elements in a really interesting way.
I kind of share the same feeling that the initial start of the movie, just when you have the mother of the suburban family just kind of just struggling to get her Avon sales going, and then she gets the bright idea, hey, there's that gothic castle way up in the mountains. Let me go there and see if I can do a cold call.
Yeah, I know.
And then, of course, when you see like the initial shot of the castle, it just looks dark and brooding, kind of like what you'd mentioned. It just looks like Frankenstein's castle. Then you get there, you have all the topiaries that have been like perfectly manicured. You had that moment where she's like, oh, maybe it's not so bad up here. And then she gets inside and it's just mad scientist laboratory. There are those moments where you have like just the juxtaposition between sort of like a monster horror movie and then sort of like the order and beauty of suburbia sort of juxtaposing each other. It's just so interesting to see. Much like you'd mentioned, Edward being really, really kind and almost meek in a sense is just not something that you expect, especially when Edward speaks. He just speaks in a very, very quiet and low tone. He isn't angry or anything. It's almost like a very, very bashful child trying to sort of speak up and everything. And it kind of adds into the whole juxtaposition because most monster movies, the monsters are violent. They don't really know how to articulate themselves, and they're real loud as well too. But yeah, just Edward, completely meek, a little bit shy, a little bit bashful. He's got the mentality of a child who's trying to do good, and that's kind of interesting as well too.
It's a very interesting juxtaposition of how they use those elements and mix them in that way, but it really works in that end too. I think there are some great performances in this film, and I think the main three performances that are really good are Diane Weiss, Winona Ryder, and Johnny Depp. I think we have to go with Depp first in this. He does a lot of things physically in this film. When it comes to comedy, I think he does very well in it. He doesn't have a lot of dialogue in the movie, but the way that he performs as Edward is like really good. It's almost robotic, because I think he's considered a robot of sorts, correct? Or it's a kind of like a Frankenstein's monster? I'm not entirely sure.
I would say Edward's more like an automaton.
That makes sense, yeah. Like, I think he performs that really well. I think Winona Ryder is actually very good in this. I'm not really a Winona Ryder fan, but I thought she did a very good job in this movie. But Diane Weiss, I think, is the best performance.
Diane Weiss and Johnny Depp probably just are the ones that really make the movie for me, because Diane plays Peg in kind of like the typical sort of suburban mom sort of role. It's kind of funny too, because when she finds Edward, it looks like just the setup of a bad monster movie. You're just like, oh, she's going to scream and she's going to run. That's just how this is going to go. Instead, she just kind of breaks into like suburban mom, and she's like, oh my God, oh, you poor thing, come here. You don't need to stay in this like rundown castle, and just brings him home. And then when she brings him home, she just treats him like one of the kids. She doesn't really see him as some sort of like grotesque monster. She just sees him as one of the kids, and she expresses so much care and sympathy for him that it's just kind of comedic in a sense too, because just she acts like he's completely normal, completely ignoring the fact that he has literal scissors for hands.
Yeah, I think the thing that is interesting about the performances of the film is that they really help tell the surprisingly deep story in this film. This movie could have easily been a fish out of water movie where the comedy is just, ho, look at Edward trying to react to all the things that are going on. But there's a deeper story involved in this movie. It's a story about the vapidness of society and otherism. I think it's really interesting how everyone in this movie at first treat him not just with respect, but with like a curiosity. I guess kind of like a toy. They're not sure of what it is. And then as the film goes on, they treat him like an other. They treat him like a monster, even though if you just paid attention to him, he's pretty easy to understand. But because they were in their own bubbles, essentially, it was really hard for them to actually ascertain that he was not a threat.
It's definitely interesting to see sort of like the ebb and flow of the suburban attitude towards Edward.
It's almost like all Edward was in this movie was what the neighbors and the people in the town wanted him to be. And it's surprisingly deep for a film that honestly looks and acts very silly, and I was really surprised by that. I do have one issue with the film. It's a small issue, and it's that the romance that is bookending the film just doesn't really fit right. The film is bookended with what it turns out to be an older Kim talking about Edward in a very loving way, and I don't understand where the love comes into that. It's not really a familial love. It's not like a brotherly love or a sisterly love. It's like, I love him. He's like that stuff. So I'm like, I don't entirely buy that.
I would say it almost kind of has a feel of Beauty and the Beast, except instead of ending with a happy ending, it ends with like unrequited feelings and love and stuff like that, which kind of goes in line with sort of gothic themes.
Okay.
Especially since Kim realizes just her feelings for Edward, but at the same time, she knows that they're just not meant to be, because if she and Edward were to try to have some sort of like relationship that maybe blooms into a marriage or something, she and Edward are always going to be constantly hounded over as curiosity, a monstrosity, whatever the suburban neighborhood feels. She ends up kind of just resigning to the fact of the matter of, as much as she loves Edward, it's just not meant to be.
Yeah, I get that. That was like the one element where I was like, I don't know about this part, but you do have a point there. I'll even concede that point. It might just be for the deeper meaning of the story than anything that you should buy. But that was a little bit of a weakness I saw. All right, Zero, so that's the end of the review. Do you recommend Edward Scissorhands?
Absolutely. It's a classic for a reason. It's one of Tim Burton's great works. It would be a disservice not to see it, especially if you're a huge Tim Burton fan and you've never seen it. You really owe it to yourself to go take time and go watch the movie. It's fantastic. It's a beloved work of Tim Burton's for a good damn reason. It kind of plays this thin line between comedy and romance, but it drinks deep from the fountain of gothic themes as well too. I quite like this one, and I cannot believe I've gone a very long time and not ever watched this movie. I've always been one of those that I kept in my backlog of, when I get a moment, I am going to watch this one. And I kept pushing it off, and pushing it off. And finally I see it now. I'm just like, wow, this is fantastic. Why did I not just stop everything and just go take a moment to go see it?
This is the great thing about doing this podcast, is that we get to see those films that I think we've all been meaning to watch and then finally experience them. I also recommend this film. This is a great movie. I really enjoyed this, and I was surprised how much I enjoy this. I think the performances are great. I think the story is surprisingly deep for what it looks like on the outside. I thought this was going to be like a kind of a scary, kind of a silly gothic horror movie, but it turned into something much deeper and much more, and I really enjoyed it. I just had that one issue that I had. This seems like a movie that I might watch again and go, oh no, I think I need to rate this a little bit higher. But right now, I'm just going to recommend it. So, Zero, do you recommend Edward Scissorhands?
Yes, absolutely. It is a recommendation by me.
And I also recommend it as well. You can check it out on Disney Plus, apparently. I didn't know that. Now, if you want my full review on this movie, you can go to my website at IamTheWiz.com. You'll have my full written review right on the site, along with a link to the video that has this review that you've just listened to. All right, Zero, so that's the end of the review. On Saturday, I'll be reviewing Rare Exports: A Christmas Tale. Tuesday, I'll be reviewing Tangerine. And Thursday, Zero, what are we reviewing?
The 1975 American political thriller 3 Days of the Condor.
That's right. 3 Days of the Condor, directed by Sidney Pollack. This is a movie that I know a little about, but just a little, not enough to know what's in the movie, honestly. What do you know about the movie?
Not much, other than it was based on a novel.
Yeah, it was 6 Days of the Condor, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's lazy producers. Can't give me 6 full days. Assholes. All right, so once again, on Saturday, I'll be reviewing Rare Exports: A Christmas Tale. Tuesday, Tangerine. And Thursday, me and Zero are reviewing 3 Days of the Condor. I am the Wiz.
And I'm Zero.
Talk to you guys next time. Bye.